CNN is reporting that people at the Pentagon are worrying what Trump is going to do next.
You know, I've talked to somewhat a dozen officers or so, some in the Pentagon, some in other areas, and they all are expressing the same concern. The conversation is the same, and it goes something like this. We don't know what he might do. This is their commander-in-chief, and they are concerned. The concern is very clear, that the president might decide to use troops, the military, somehow in his effort to overturn the election. The immediate question, of course, would be, how is any of this legal? But setting legality aside, why are they so concerned? Well, you know, Mike Flynn, the fired national security advisor, former three-star Army general, has now spoken publicly about using martial law, the prospect of it, and he has now met with the president. This is something that is getting quite noticed around military circles. And I want to take your attention to a very particular tweet from a very significant retired general. Retired General Tony Thomas headed Special Operations Command, all special operations for many years. He knows Flynn well. And this is what he tweeted just a few days ago. Let me read it to everybody. General Thomas says, Mike, stop. Just stop. You're a former soldier. You know that leveraging the military to rerun elections is a totally inappropriate role for the profession. You are also undercutting the extraordinary trust and confidence America has in their military. Stop. Telling General Flynn, don't talk about using the military to rerun elections. That's the concern that the active duty has right now. Now, the most senior U.S. military officer, General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, hasn't spoken about this directly and specifically, but just a few weeks ago, he very pointedly talked about what the U.S. military does and does not do.
We are unique among militaries. We do not take an oath to a king or a queen, a tyrant or a dictator. We do not take an oath to an individual. No, we do not take an oath to a country, a tribe, or a religion. We take an oath to the Constitution.
The Constitution, and in the latest development in all of this undercurrent of anxiety, the four-star general who heads the Army, the chief of staff, and the civilian head of the Army, the secretary of the Army, actually, of course, a Trump appointee. Those two men, a couple of days ago, felt compelled to publicly say that the military has no role in election outcomes. This is the conversation at the Pentagon.
So this conversation is interesting because even just crossing the line of like a president entertaining these ideas is disturbing and unacceptable. Like that alone, it puts us in uncharted territory. The fact that a president is musing about, you know, a coup or staying in power after a definitive loss, that alone should make you hate Trump. Because of course he doesn't believe in any sort of democratic process. He only believes in it to the extent that he could win. And if he doesn't win, then he's going to immediately throw it out. And that's what we're seeing right now. They had their chance to make their case in court, and they failed miserably. Because when you actually had to present evidence and proof, they had nothing. They had anecdotal stories from crazy people and out of context 15-second Twitter videos. Like, okay, if there was something there, these overwhelmingly conservative courts would have sided with him. But they didn't, because there's nothing there. So that alone, the fact that he's musing about this stuff is bad alone. But does the media sort of feed into this hysteria to an extent, even though Trump overwhelmingly likely does not have the capacity and the ability to plan something out like this, to really stage some sort of effective coup? Yeah, like I also feel like this is media fodder where it's the narrative and it's the storyline that they love, and so they're feeding that storyline and that narrative, even though I think deep down they know that it ain't gonna happen. Yeah, he'll be dragged out of the Oval Office kicking and screaming. That's the very, very likely scenario. But I think it does help I don't think they're purely doing it for ratings, but I think that is a part of it. I do. Because this is the kind of stuff that gets eyes to watch CNN. If it wasn't for Trump, CNN would only be on at like barbershops and airports, and that's it. You know, nobody's like a CNN stan. Very few people are CNN stans. So Trump makes it so that they have that constant 24-hour cycle going, and they treat the real world like it's some sort of cheesy, cheap, you know, low-budget, trashy reality show that's partially scripted, you know? So yeah, I'm of two minds about this. On the one hand, even the fact that Trump sort of openly muses about staying in office even though he lost, that's bad enough. And that's enough cause and reason for condemnation, for sure. And nobody should really downplay how serious that is in and of itself. And I've seen some of that too. But yeah, will it actually happen? Will his diet coup attempt come to fruition? 99% no. And you could say, hey, the fact that there's even a 1% chance that it does is disconcerting and bad. Agreed, totally. But yeah, I do think the media sort of plays it up a little bit because they like this narrative. They love this narrative. And you saw the general there. By the way, that's the same general. I like to call him General Meek Mill because his name sounds very similar to Meek Mill. General Meek Mill was the one who, after Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, he gave a speech like a week later and was basically like, we're never doing that. So in other words, he's saying, even if Trump made the order, I'm not carrying it out. Which, it opens up a very interesting constitutional question and judicial question, right? So we do have a hierarchy of power, especially when it comes to the military, and he's the commander-in-chief, and in theory, he should be listened to with stuff like when he says get out of Afghanistan, the generals cannot and should not and can't override him, but they do, unfortunately. But, so like in some instances, if Trump says something, you want the military to listen because he's the commander-in-chief. He's in charge. So if he says get out of Afghanistan and they don't, Trump is right and they're wrong. But then there's another legal question, which is, so what if Trump is asking the generals to do something that's clearly unconstitutional? Then what? Getting out of Afghanistan is not unconstitutional. Getting out of Iraq is not unconstitutional. Deploying the U.S. military in U.S. streets to quell protests? I mean, that's clearly a violation of the First Amendment. And General Meek Mill said that when he gave the speech on the Insurrection Act. So again, what that signal is he gave a speech and he was basically saying, like, we don't answer to a king or a dictator. There's going to be a peaceful transition of power. And if you lose the military, and Trump has, ain't going to be no coup, son. You're going to get your ass kicked to the curb. That's what's going to happen. So that should make you rest easy. But of course, it doesn't really make CNN rest easy. It makes CNN like, let's feed the narrative more. Let's make it seem like, he's going to do it. Or he's going to succeed at doing it. Highly, highly, highly unlikely. But either way, nobody can deny he has that authoritarian impulse. He does. He's just ineffectual and disorganized and impulsive. But he certainly has that authoritarian impulse. But honestly, we knew that from day one.